November 23, 2001, 4:30 p.m. Harrison Ford's Brentwood mansion. The Thanksgiving table is set for 12, but the only sound in the dining room is uncomfortable silence. Harrison Ford sits at the head of the table, his third glass of wine already empty before the turkey is carved, and his 19-year-old daughter Georgia is watching him with focused intensity, preparing to change someone's life forever. What Georgia Ford is about to say will end the pretending, shatter the silence, and force one of Hollywood's biggest stars to confront the truth he's been drowning in alcohol for 5 years. And what happens in the next 48 hours will prove that sometimes the people who love us most are brave enough to hurt us with the truth. To understand why Georgia Ford chose Thanksgiving 2001 to confront her father, you need to understand what had been happening in the Ford household. Harrison was at the height of his career success, but the lowest point of his personal life, the pressure of being Harrison Ford. The expectations, the scrutiny, the impossible standard of heroism had finally caught up with him. It started gradually after filming Air Force One in 1997. Playing a president who single-handedly saves his family and country had pushed Harrison to his emotional breaking point. For the first time, he openly questioned whether he could live up to the hero the world expected him to be. I remember Harrison saying to me, "What happens when people figure out I'm just a guy who reads lines? What happens when they realize I'm not actually brave?" Recalls his friend, stunt coordinator Vic Armstrong. The question revealed the existential crisis eating away at Harrison Ford. After 20 years of playing iconic heroes, he had begun internalizing the impossible expectation that he should actually be heroic in real life. Every stumble, every moment of uncertainty felt like a betrayal of his public image, and alcohol became the anesthetic that numbed that constant fear. A glass of wine with dinner became 2 glasses. 2 glasses became a bottle. A drink to relax became a drink to get through the day. By 2001, Harrison Ford was drinking every single day, starting earlier and earlier, using alcohol as a buffer between himself and a world demanding perfection 24 hours a day. The family knew, but like many families dealing with a functional alcoholic, they had developed an elaborate system of excuses and willful blindness. Harrison was still working, still successful. He wasn't falling down drunk or making headlines. He was just different, distant, angry, unreliable in ways that slowly erode a family's foundation. His wife Melissa had tried addressing the issue, but Harrison's response was always defensive deflection. "I'm not hurting anyone. I still provide for this family. If I want to have a drink to unwind, that's my business." The conversation would end with Melissa frustrated and Harrison feeling justified. But Georgia Ford was different. At 19, she possessed psychological insight from studying human behavior, combined with fearless conviction that comes with youth. She had spent winter break really watching her father for the first time in years. What she saw terrified her. Harrison looked older than his 59 years, more tired, and there was something in his eyes she had never seen before: defeat. The man who had played cinema's most confident heroes looked like he was giving up on life. But what scared Georgia more was how the family was adapting to Harrison's drinking. Conversations were scheduled around his moods. Plans changed to accommodate his unpredictability. Everyone walked on eggshells, protecting the alcoholic instead of confronting the problem. Georgia had spent 3 days quietly observing her father's patterns. She watched him pour his first drink at 11 a.m. on Wednesday. She watched him become increasingly irritable without alcohol, then noticeably relaxed after each drink. She watched him struggle to remember conversations, then become defensive when questioned about forgotten details. Most heartbreaking, she watched her family adjust their behavior to accommodate Harrison's drinking. They spoke more quietly around him. They avoided topics that might upset him. They cleaned up evidence of his drinking before visitors arrived. The entire family had become complicit in protecting Harrison's addiction. The confrontation began innocuously. Harrison made a joke about needing a little something to make the family bearable as he poured his 4th glass of wine. It was the kind of comment he'd been making for months, using humor to deflect attention from how much he was drinking. But this time, Georgia set down her fork and looked directly at her father. "Dad," she said, her voice calm but carrying surprising authority. "We need to talk about your drinking." The silence that followed, was unlike anything the Ford family had experienced. Harrison stopped mid-pour, the wine bottle frozen in his hand. Other family members looked between father and daughter, unsure whether to intervene or run. Georgia just sat there, waiting, her psychology textbooks having taught her that silence could be the most powerful intervention tool. Harrison's first reaction was predictable. Anger. "Excuse me," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "What did you just say to me?" "I said we need to talk about your drinking," Georgia repeated, not backing down, "because it's destroying this family, and somebody has to say something before you destroy yourself too." The wine bottle came down harder than Harrison intended, rattling glasses and splashing wine onto the white tablecloth. "Georgia, you're 19 years old. You don't know what you're talking about. I have a glass of wine with dinner like millions of other people." "Dad, stop." Georgia's voice cut through his denial like a knife. "Please don't lie to me anymore. You had your first drink at 11 a.m. yesterday. You can't get through a conversation without a glass in your hand. You forgot you promised to drive me to see Sarah, then got angry when I reminded you. Right now you're more concerned about defending your drinking than asking why your daughter is scared enough to bring this up." Each observation hit Harrison like separate accusations, and the worst part was he couldn't deny any of them. He had started drinking early. He did have trouble maintaining conversations without alcohol. He had forgotten about promising to drive Georgia and gotten angry when reminded, not because he was busy, but because being reminded embarrassed him. "Those were isolated incidents," Harrison said weakly, his anger crumbling into something like shame. "Everyone makes mistakes." "Dad," Georgia said, standing to face him across the table, "you're making the same mistake every single day. We're all pretending it's not happening because we love you and we're scared of losing you. But I'd rather have a father who's angry at me for telling the truth than a father who's slowly drinking himself to death while we all watch in silence." Harrison looked around the table and saw the faces of his family, some shocked, some relieved, all watching with love, concern, and fear. These were the people who mattered most, and they were all afraid of him. Not Harrison Ford, the movie star, but Harrison Ford, the father who had become unpredictable and angry. Instead of accepting the truth, Harrison doubled down on denial. "Georgia, this is completely inappropriate. I don't know what you think you've learned in college, but you don't get to psychoanalyze your father at Thanksgiving dinner. I work hard. I provide for this family, and if I want to have a drink to relax, that's my business." "When does it become our business, Dad?" Georgia asked, her voice breaking slightly. "When you miss my graduation because you're too drunk to drive? When you forget Mom's birthday because you passed out on the couch? When you stop returning my calls because you can't remember our conversations? When you get angry at Ben for asking homework help because you've been drinking and can't concentrate?" Each example hit Harrison like separate accusations he couldn't deny. He had missed Georgia's graduation, forgotten Melissa's birthday, struggled with phone conversations, and snapped at Ben recently, not because he was busy, but because alcohol had impaired his ability to function as a father. Malcolm, his eldest son, finally spoke. "Dad, Georgia's right. We've all been walking on eggshells around you. We schedule family time around your drinking. We avoid bringing friends over because we're not sure what mood you'll be in. Mom makes excuses when you can't remember commitments. We're protecting your drinking instead of protecting you." Ben, his youngest son, looked at Harrison with tears in his eyes. "Dad, I miss you. You're here, but you're not really here anymore." Those words, "I miss you," hit Harrison harder than any accusation. His children didn't hate him for drinking. They missed him. They mourned the father he used to be before alcohol became his primary relationship. Harrison sank back into his chair, the fight going out of him. For the first time since the confrontation began, he really looked at his family, really saw them. And what he saw was people who loved him desperately and were watching helplessly as he slowly disappeared into a bottle. "What do you want me to say, Georgia?" Harrison asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want me to do?" Georgia's answer became the turning point of Harrison Ford's life. "I want you to tell the truth, just once. Stop making excuses and stop pretending. Just tell us the truth about what's happening to you." Harrison Ford stood in his dining room, surrounded by family, holding an empty wine glass, and for the first time in 5 years, he told the truth. "I'm scared," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm scared every day that I'm going to disappoint everyone who thinks I'm some kind of hero. I'm scared I'm not as strong as the characters I play. I'm scared you're all going to figure out I'm just a regular guy who got lucky, and when you do, you'll stop loving me." And drinking makes that fear go away for a little while. The admission hung in the air like smoke. Harrison had confessed to the deepest insecurity driving his alcoholism, the fear that he wasn't worthy of love and admiration, and that alcohol was the only thing making that fear bearable. Georgia walked around the table and took the wine glass from her father's hand. "Dad, we didn't fall in love with Han Solo or Indiana Jones, we fell in love with you. The real you. The guy who taught me to throw a curveball and drove me to school every day. That guy doesn't need to be a hero to anyone except us. And he doesn't need alcohol to be worthy of love." What happened next wasn't a Hollywood ending, but the messy, complicated beginning of Harrison Ford's recovery. Harrison agreed to see a counselor, but initially refused AA meetings because of photographers. He tried quitting cold turkey, but withdrawal made him irritable and sick. After 3 days of misery, he convinced himself one glass would take the edge off. One glass became two. Two became a bottle. The breakthrough came during a counseling session with Dr. Sarah Chen, who asked a simple question that changed everything. "Harrison, what would happen if your fans knew you were struggling with alcohol? What's the worst-case scenario?" Harrison described his fears: disappointment, lost respect, career damage, becoming a cautionary tale. But when Dr. Chen asked, "And then what would happen?" Harrison realized he had never thought beyond the immediate catastrophe. "Is it possible," Dr. Chen asked, "that some fans might respect you more for being honest? Is it possible your vulnerability could help someone else fighting the same battle?" That realization, that his vulnerability could be strength rather than weakness, became the foundation of Harrison's sobriety. He stopped drinking not from fear of disappointing people, but because his honesty about struggles could actually help people. Harrison's approach to recovery changed completely. Instead of hiding his struggle, he began seeing it as part of his story. He started attending AA meetings, initially disguised, but eventually trusting the group's commitment to anonymity. The changes in Harrison after sobriety were remarkable. He became more present with family, more engaged with work, and paradoxically more confident publicly. The fear that drove him to drink was replaced by acceptance that worthiness wasn't about perfection, it was about authenticity. Georgia Ford, now 41 and a practicing family therapist, still considers that Thanksgiving confrontation one of the most important moments of her life. "I was terrified. I thought he might hate me for calling him out. But addiction thrives in silence, and someone had to break that silence." Dad was waiting for permission to tell the truth. Harrison's performances in films after 2002 showed a depth and vulnerability that critics and audiences found compelling. He wasn't trying to be a perfect hero anymore. He was playing complex, flawed characters who struggled with their humanity. In interviews, Harrison began speaking more openly about heroic expectations. "I spent years trying to be worthy of the heroes I played. It took me a long time to realize heroes aren't perfect. They're just people who keep trying to do the right thing, even when they're scared." Today, Harrison Ford has been sober for over 20 years. He credits his daughter's courage with saving his life, but Georgia sees it differently. "I didn't save Dad's life. I just reminded him his life was worth saving." The real hero is a man brave enough to admit he needed help, then did the work to get better. The lesson of Harrison Ford's recovery extends beyond one family's struggle. In a culture demanding perfection from heroes, Harrison's story reminds us that real strength comes from acknowledging weakness, real courage from asking for help, and real love means telling difficult truths to people who matter most. Sometimes it takes a 19-year-old college student to remind one of the world's biggest movie stars that being human isn't a flaw to hide, it's a gift to share. The Thanksgiving dinner supposed to be about gratitude became about truth, and that truth, painful as it was to speak and hear, became the foundation for a new kind of family relationship based on honesty rather than pretense. Harrison Ford learned that the most important performances happen when cameras aren't rolling, and the only audience that matters is the people you love. Sometimes, Those performances require the courage to stop acting altogether and just be human.